During the antebellum period, a time of great change and tension in American history, the institution of slavery cast a long and sinister shadow over the nation. The term antebellum refers to the period before the American Civil War, which spanned from the late 18th century to the early 19th century. It was a time of rapid economic growth, territorial expansion, and the entrenchment of slavery as a deeply divisive and morally reprehensible practice. At the heart of the antebellum era was the transatlantic slave trade, a system of human trafficking that forcibly transported millions of African people from their homelands to the Americas. This trade, rooted in greed and fueled by the insatiable demand for labor in European colonies and later the United States, had profound and enduring consequences for both continents. The transatlantic slave trade was not solely a result of European initiatives. It involved complex interactions with African tribes and kingdoms. European slave traders often relied on intermediaries, including African chiefs, merchants, and local elites, to facilitate the capture and sale of enslaved individuals. It is true that some African tribes and individuals participated in the slave trade, either as captors or as middlemen in the process. Factors contributing to their involvement ranged from economic incentives to intertribal conflicts and the desire to acquire goods from European traders. During the transatlantic slave trade, numerous African tribes and ethnic groups were forcibly captured and enslaved. Some of the major tribes that were impacted by these acts of slavery include the Igbo people, who reside in present-day Nigeria. The Igbo experienced immense suffering and loss as a result of the slave trade, with some women choosing to drown themselves rather than endure the horrors of slavery. When slave raiders or rival tribes attacked Igbo villages, chaos and devastation ensued.
Men, women, and children were forcibly seized, separated from their families, and herded into holding pens for sale to European slave traders. The conditions in these pens were deplorable, with overcrowding, disease, and lack of adequate food and sanitation. For Igbo women, the prospect of being sold into a life of slavery with its inhuman physical and sexual abuse was often unbearable. In some instances, rather than facing the unthinkable suffering that awaited them, some Igbo women made the agonizing decision to choose their own fate and drown themselves. The Yoruba people, also from present-day Nigeria, had a rich cultural heritage, including art, religion, and a complex social structure, were another significant ethnic group affected by the transatlantic slave trade. We also had the Akan people, predominantly from present-day Ghana and Ivory Coast, were highly sought after by European slavers. They were known for their agricultural practices, gold mining, and craftsmanship. The methods employed in capturing and selling enslaved Africans varied across regions and circumstances. Some captives were seized through intertribal warfare, raids, or conflicts, where rival tribes would capture and sell members of opposing groups. Other times, individuals were kidnapped, often through acts of deception and betrayal. There were several ways in which African chiefs were involved in the slave trade, some of which include the following. Collaboration with European traders. European slave traders often relied on intermediaries to facilitate the capture and sale of enslaved Africans. Some African chiefs, motivated by economic incentives or coerced through political pressure, formed alliances with European traders. They provided captives or participated in slave-raiding expeditions, receiving firearms, cloth, alcohol, and other goods in exchange. Intertribal conflicts. In some instances, African chiefs participated in intertribal conflicts and warfare, capturing members of rival tribes and selling them into slavery. The slave trade increased existing tensions and conflicts between different African communities, leading to the capture and sale of individuals from neighboring tribes. Tribute or taxation. Some African chiefs imposed tribute or taxes on neighboring communities, often in the form of enslaved individuals. These captives would then be sold to European slave traders or exchanged for goods. And last but not the least, judicial systems. In some cases, African chiefs used their judicial systems to sentence individuals to slavery as a form of punishment for crimes, or as a means of resolving disputes. These individuals would subsequently be sold into the transatlantic slave trade. What becomes the fate of these captured individuals? Once captured, enslaved Africans were transported to coastal areas where they would be held in holding barracoons. The conditions in these places were abhorrent, with overcrowding, disease, and malnutrition rampant. From these coastal areas, they would be transported to the Americas in slave ships, enduring the infamous Middle Passage. The Middle Passage was the treacherous voyage across the Atlantic Ocean endured by enslaved Africans. Packed tightly below deck, shackled and chained, they suffered unimaginable horrors during the journey. Disease, malnutrition, and the brutal treatment inflicted by the crew resulted in the deaths of countless individuals. Some chose to resist by refusing food or jumping overboard, preferring death to a life of enslavement. The transatlantic slave trade was driven primarily by the demand for labor in European colonies in the Americas. European colonial powers, including Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands, established vast networks of plantations and industries that relied on enslaved labor. These colonial powers profited immensely from the slave trade, accumulating vast wealth and resources. The labor of enslaved Africans fueled the growth of lucrative industries such as sugar, tobacco, cotton, and mining. The transatlantic slave trade was a deeply tragic and reprehensible period in history. It involved a complex web of complicity, with multiple parties playing a role in its perpetuation. Some chiefs may have been driven by economic considerations, seeking to gain wealth or resources from European traders. Others may have been manipulated by European powers, who leveraged existing power dynamics to their advantage. But still, recognizing the involvement of African chiefs in the slave trade is an essential part of understanding the full scope and dynamics of this historical tragedy. The suffering endured by enslaved Africans, their forced separation from their homes and families, and the enduring legacy of racism and inequality are reminders of the profound injustice and inhumanity of this trade. It is crucial that we remember this dark chapter, confront its legacy, and strive to build a more just and inclusive world, where the dignity and equality of all people are upheld. Thank you for watching.